Hey everyone, Chris here, and what you're about to listen to is an RH Gaiden, part of the content that is exclusive to our patrons over at Patreon. So if you want to hear more content like this, and you're just interested in supporting us in general, just head over to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/retrohangover, or you can find it at linktree/retrohangover. That's linktr.ee/retrohangover, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Today we are covering the game SOMA, and guess what? Shane's going to be on a Gaiden with me. So first off, Shane.
Oh my God.
You're here with me on a Gaiden. We're getting good about this, on doing these things together, this extra Patreon content.
I mean, kinda. You're honestly, you're still kind of holding things up on the bonus content front. I got a backlog of Chris shit for days.
I just need to make more shit and just start flinging it at you. I'm just going to start doing reviews of Wordle.
You saw that, huh? That's my latest game that I've been playing. Yeah,
Wordle.
I'm on that Wordle action.
There you go.
I'm sure the next main episode we get to, we're going to hear all about it. We're not going to do that for the Gaiden, though.
Oh, shit. That just gave me a great idea. I'm totally going to do a fucking rapid fire review on Wordle. It'll be fantastic.
Get more content from Shane about Wordle. Stand by for that. And also today, and kind of the inspiration for me getting this episode together for you all, is Mike from the Region Free Gamers podcast. Mike, it's so happy. It's so happy. Holy shit.
It is. It's a very happy game. You're right.
It is very happy. You are here. Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Mike, I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Shane. I'm really happy to be here. And honestly, I'm kind of blown away. I'm pretty touched that, I might have been a small part of you checking this game out, because that's cool, man.
Absolutely, dude. Just because of that episode you did, what was it, like Halloween independent developer, like independent horror games and shit? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I'd be playing this game without that episode. So
yeah, I'm already laughing because I think I remember on that episode I wanted to talk about Soma, but I was like, I can't, and I was like yelling about it, and then so that's kind of even better that I didn't. But anyway, moving on.
And now we got a whole episode, so we can spoil the shit out of this game.
Yes, absolutely.
But before we get started about that, hey, look. I've heard some complaints about some of these RH Gaidens where people say, I wouldn't necessarily call it a complaint, but it's more like, hey, I really want to listen to this episode, but I don't want this game spoiled for me. So this time, because this is a spoiler heavy game, we are just going to be talking about the game for the first half, roughly. I'm predicting half. I have no idea how long the second half will be. It could be the first
probably
third,
longer
first quarter.
Yeah, I think the back half's going to be longer.
Yes. So yeah, we are going to be talking about SOMA. And before we really get talking about it in terms of kind of our own format that we do for our main episodes, there's not brief history because we don't do that on RH Gaiden because it's not a retro game. So it hasn't really had a lot of time to ferment. I think it's close. It's really close. But SOMA is a game, obviously, that was released on... Yeah, I know, right? It was released on September 22nd, 2015 for the PC and PS4, and December 1st, 2017 for the Xbox One. So we're looking at a game that's almost 7 years old. That's terrifying.
It is.
It was developed and published by Frictional Games, who are known for being the makers of the Amnesia series. Mm-hmm. And the type of game it is, just very briefly, is a first-person survival horror. I guess that's the best way to put it, except you're not killing stuff. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that as well.
Right.
So I think I have the least interesting personal experience. I think I already kind of said what my personal experience is with this game. So I'll just kick it off and I'll let you two talk more about your own personal experiences with this and because you've been with this game much longer. I just picked this up because Mike said it was a good game and it was on sale. So it's like, okay, cool. I'm going to check this out. And because I thought it was so cool, I was like, hey, let's make an episode where we can talk about it because it's not over 10 years old and I can do crazy shit with these Gaiden stuff. So let's do it. So that being said, Mike, that's because I'm boring. Normally the guest goes first, but I'm so dull on this one. How about you talk about your personal experience, what got you into this game?
For me, basically, it was a combination of the game is partially set in Toronto, sort of, kind of. And that, when it came out, it was just kind of whisperings of that. And I lived in Toronto at the time, and not many games are set in Toronto, even though, it's kind of a burgeoning indie community and AAA community. So I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of neat. But it was mostly because it felt like every couple days there was some YouTuber that, and I'll be honest, some that I really respect and I think are like, have great commentary and great things to say about games, and some that maybe don't so much and they're kind of full of hot air. But it just felt like there were so many that all of a sudden we're talking about this game and talking about how amazing it was and how, what interesting things the narrative does and where it takes you. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, like this kind of sounds like it might be my jam, but I just never kind of got around to it because I think at the time I was like, man, I don't know, it looks like a walking simulator. I'm not into games where you can't fight back, blah, blah, blah. And then finally I saw it on sale. I think it was $2, like Canadian dollars. So that's like what, negative 5 cents? That's
I think Frictional paid you.
Yeah, like I think Frictional paid me basically, and I was like, oh man, I gotta just try it now. And so I played it. I'll probably get into this more later, but I played it right when Toronto first went into lockdown. For the first lockdown, when everybody was like, oh, cool, like the world's ending as we know it, and nobody knows what the hell's going to happen. And the vaccines were like a little glint in, Daddy Science's eye, and I played it then, and it probably wasn't a really good idea to play it then. I'll just say that. But at the same time, it was great because I really enjoyed it.
How about you, Shane? Where did you first hear about this game? How'd you get into it?
And honestly, the only reason I even remember this is thankfully digital platforms keep track of when you play things. But I ended up picking this up roughly a year or so after it first released on PC. And it had already been on sale at that point. So I did pick it up on a sale because honestly, I don't think I buy too many things full price these days anyway. So it's probably a safe bet that it was on a sale regardless. But what kind of led me to it was I had already played through a few of Frictional Games' previous efforts in the Penumbra series, as well as Amnesia. Nice. I have not played all of them, though. I think I played the first. It was like Penumbra Overture, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then obviously Dark Descent with Amnesia. So based on their track record, I felt like I had a pretty good idea going into this, like what I was getting myself into. And for the most part, I don't think I was too wrong, but we'll get into more of that in a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of how I first encountered SOMA.
Okay, good. So apparently I'm the only one who went into this completely blind because I had no idea this was made by the creators of Amnesia when I started playing the game. I was like, oh, this game plays a lot like Amnesia. I just had no idea, like absolutely zero. But I'm happy I've learned that. I mean, I don't remember getting into Amnesia too much because I'm just like a big softie and that game scared the shit out of me. So I put that down.
I was going to say, honestly, I was surprised when you mentioned that you were doing a Gaiden on SOMA. I was just like, this doesn't sound like a Chris game at all. I'm like, what got you to play this? But now I get it. I'm glad that a Mike led you to it because I could be wrong, but I feel like you're not usually a huge horror game kind of guy. So I feel like you probably wouldn't have otherwise experienced this, right?
I like them in theory.
In theory. Got it. Yeah. Okay.
I'm a big Resident Evil fan in theory.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I think you're the best to kind of give an introduction to the story here in terms avoiding spoilers. Just give us a general idea of what kind of game this is and what's going on just to open us up and we'll go from there.
So essentially, SOMA is a game about someone who goes to get their brain scanned as part of some treatment for a brain injury that they've received in an accident. And immediately following the brain scan, they sort of wake up in this completely foreign place where all the lights are off and everything is enclosed and everything looks like just kind of, like high technology, almost looks like a submarine. And essentially, that's how the game starts. And through the course of the game, you're basically trying to find a way to get out of wherever you are to kind of get back to, real life. Man, this is so hard to do. I love that you put me on the spot like this. It's so hard to do without saying spoilers. But basically, the crux of the game is kind of similar if you played some of Frictional's other games like Amnesia or Penumbra. The essential gameplay and the crux of it is basically the same, where you're exploring these very dangerous claustrophobic areas that are full of, dangerous things that want to hurt you, and just trying to figure out what is going on, like trying to piece things together. That's not exactly new. There's obviously lots of games that have done stuff like that. I think a lot of people, when they see the imagery and stuff, they might immediately think of something like BioShock, especially since the game, I mean, this isn't really a spoiler, but the game takes place underwater in like these kind of underwater sea labs. And essentially, you're exploring these kind of claustrophobic environments, all these hazardous places where obviously some real horrifying shit has gone down, and you're just trying to find out what happened, why you're there, how you can get out, what you can actually do, and looking for other survivors and other people who might still be alive and be able to help you. And the fun is when you sort of discover the state of these survivors and kind of how they are and how you interact with them. And that's kind of where I think the fun starts. But in a nutshell, that's kind of that. You have sort of a quest to kind of deliver a MacGuffin to a certain area, and that's kind of what you're supposed to do in the game. But the way it starts out, the way it's set up, it's very, very BioShock-esque now that I think about it in some ways. But it really is this idea of a very normal in the sense that you're getting your brain scanned, but like a very kind of normal setup that immediately segues into a completely foreign situation where, you were very vulnerable, very confused, very, almost traumatized about like what's going on and where you are and trying to figure that out.
Yeah. And I know like we're not talking spoilers here, but one of the things that I think kind of ruined, I won't say ruined, because the narrative is really, really phenomenal, is when you start playing the game, it immediately gives you a quote from Philip K. Dick.
Yes.
And so that's no spoiler. The game is giving you a Philip K. Dick quote, and as the events start happening, it becomes, I don't want to say predictable, because it's not predictable just based off knowing that there's a quote from Philip K. Dick, but things, you can start putting things together in your own head pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really divert from that. There's much more to it than what, and again, I'm being extraordinarily vague. I apologize. I gotta be.
Yeah.
We'll get more into that later. But it's kind of like, oh, okay, I see what they're trying to do. And if you don't know who Philip K. Dick is, that's fine. You can look him up after this podcast, so you're not, if you have never played this game before. So this is to maintain spoiler free. But that kind of set up the rest of the game for me in terms of the narrative, and it still did exceed my expectations, but it didn't really exceed it. But again, the narrative was, I think, expertly delivered. What do you think, Shane?
Yeah, this is one of those games where it is very difficult to say too much without accidentally tripping into spoiler territory, but suffice to say, I thought the plot was extremely well written and engaging, which, if I'm being just completely honest here, was kind of a refreshing change from some of Frictional's previous titles, because a lot of those, at least to me, always kind of felt fairly light on actual like meaty story and more just about like the spooky scary man's gonna get you in the dark kind of thing. And so I think the much heavier reliance on, a very well thought out and for the most part pretty well paced plot was really nice, because I did not want this to be another Penumbra or Amnesia. And that was the thing that I was worried about actually going into this game was, okay, am I just gonna like have another like hide from dude and then go find some things and hide from another dude thing for this entire game? Because I'll be honest, I actually bounced off of Penumbra pretty hard. I didn't actually finish it for that reason, because it was very much just like I don't really care so much about whatever the plot of this game is, and this gameplay is not really keeping me engaged. Amnesia was better, but I think this really hit a sweet spot of just enough of that gameplay mechanic, but with a lot more like really great plot gravy over the top of it. So
it's interesting you bring that up, because I was actually curious because I've never played Amnesia or Penumbra, because from what I've seen too, it seems like that would be the case. It would be a lot more plot driven. It would be, not that it wouldn't be psychological, because obviously Amnesia has a bunch of psychological horror elements, but it's much more about, well, there's a really spooky, scary thing and it's chasing you. Whereas, I mean, as we're going to get into, like, to me, the horror of Soma has so, like, I don't want to say little, but it feels like it's such a smaller part of it is about there's a big spooky thing that's trying to kill you. It's what's scary about it is kind of something so much more. And that to me is sort of what I think works. And to your point, Shane, I like the way you put it with that delicate balance, because you're right. I think, taken up on his gameplay alone, and, I don't think there's anything that it's doing that is that amazing. And like you said, the pacing is mostly okay. Like sometimes the pacing's a little weird because you are dealing with a game that has a lot of direct threats and a lot of indirect threats, and sometimes they kind of jumble that up. Like sometimes they don't know how, to balance that. But yeah, it kind of succeeds with that. Penumbra and Amnesia, was it just more that it was like a plot thing? There was less of, kind of character development and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not to say that it was non-existent.
For sure, yeah.
But comparatively, it was very, very scarce. More so with Penumbra, I think, than with Amnesia. There was much more of an overarching plot, I think, with Dark Descent. But then again, Penumbra was kind of in Frictional's sort of like first effort, so I guess I gotta give him a little slack. But yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like I think the real triumph here with Soma and the true horror of it has very little to do with the creatures that are stalking you in the corridors of this like derelict, deep sea station, and more about this creeping existential dread that you end up getting. And you as the player get, and consequently the main character also gets sort of simultaneously, when you start to come to terms with realizations about some things that are truly more horrific on a grander scale than just what is the scary thing around the corner.
Yeah.
See, that's what I find interesting, because I actually found the horror in the more of the creepy, crawly enemy type of things.
Interesting.
I was much more freaked out by the environments, and we'll get that into gameplay for myself there. But I looked at the narrative as more thought-provoking. I found it very much interesting, just something I could sit back and think about with more interest and enjoyment and just mind exercises about what things mean.
Yeah.
I didn't find horror in the story at all, but that is also the thing that kept me playing the game.
Right.
Just before we head to gameplay, I guess it kind of ties in and makes for a good segue. Did you enjoy the way the story was told, mostly through documents, computer files, stuff like that, much in a Resident Evil style, rather than it being a lot of exposition? Or would you have preferred more exposition?
That's a tough one, because I think I've probably gone on record at least once or twice being in the camp of, I think finding audio logs or written logs is lazy game development. So this game does do that. But having said that, I think it fits with not the atmosphere necessarily, but like the environment that they've built, I think it makes sense in this particular context of why you would do that. I've played games before where they do just have like shit lying around that you pick up, and it's like this diary entry, and you're like, why the fuck is this here? Like, no one would ever do this, but it makes sense here, so I'm okay with it. And there is still enough actual voiced dialogue and exposition that I think it's pretty well balanced for the most part. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
I mean, I definitely think having it be sort of case files and things like that, and audio logs that you collect in this game, I agree with you, Shane. I think that it can be lazy in a lot. It can be sort of just used as a crutch, especially in, it's funny, you made me think of Singularity for some reason, because in Singularity, there's just these huge tape reel players just lying on the floor in a basement surrounded by like radioactive Russian mutants. And I'm just like, why the fuck, but I think if you earn it, it's okay. And I think some games earn it through kind of the visual and the world storytelling. Like, they've created a world where, like you said, it totally makes sense. And in SOMA, what I think is so cool, and this isn't a spoiler, what I think is so cool about SOMA is that the brunt of these collectibles are all kind of in world, like monitors and things like that totally make sense for that world, and depending on the place that you're in. But not only that, the locations of the audio logs sometimes kind of reflect, it's well set, because I'm trying to think of it, like, I'll just use an example, try not to spoil anything, but maybe you'll get to a door and the door will be locked, and there will be an audio log when you try to access that door that, is from a recording of someone trying to open that door in the past, and so it's all kind of connected, and it's almost like you're retracing the steps of people who have gone the same path as you, but they did it before. And so you kind of get bits and pieces of, okay, well, what the hell happened to them as they were doing whatever they were doing during this audio log? And I think that's why it succeeds. It's because it's all connected to what's happening and to progression. Whereas I think the lazy ones is when it's just like an audio log saying, and then, journal log this day, we did the experiment, and oh no, the experiment got loose, and it's just the kind of like, it's just sort of lazy like that. It just kind of gives away what's happening, or fills in the blanks. Whereas this is more like, no, we're trying to tell a story of the people who were here before through these logs, and I think that's kind of why it works for me.
Yeah, I totally agree, and like I said, I think the complementary piece to that helps make it work without feeling too lazy is that they also have a pretty healthy dose of like telling through showing, which I think is important, because a lot of those games where I would call it more of a cop out with like audio logs or written journals or whatever is when you don't get that. And to your point, it's just like the only way that you learn about something that has happened or is happening is through some written note you found on a chair somewhere or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that does segue well into the gameplay portion where you have to access these logs, access this material, and find things as you're navigating your way through this underwater area. I got to be honest with you guys. I think you all agree on this one that the gameplay definitely is not the highlight of this game.
No,
not at all.
No way. It's not. Like,
it feels like it's a budget game. It definitely feels like it's a step below what the big boys are doing. You can tell it's indie chops are there. It's not horrific. It works, right?
I don't know if I'd use budget, but
yeah, it's I think
not high budget, high indie budget.
As I define budget, because when you say budget, you're just like, it's some dollar store ass gameplay, and I don't know if I'd go that far.
Low.
Yeah.
Not that low.
I mean, for what it's worth, Frictional have their own in-house game engine also, which is the HPL engine, named after H.P. Lovecraft. But there's probably a little bit maybe of some idiosyncratic jank that you might get with that kind of in-house stuff. They're not just running the latest fancy Unreal or whatever. I don't know. Overall, though, I didn't have too many complaints about some of these things, but I'll let you continue, Chris. I kind of cut you off there.
Oh, sure. So first of all, the game's designed for a controller. It's straight up designed for a controller. But there's problems that you get when you have the controller. I don't know the problems or features or whatever, because you're playing this game with a mouse. There's the option to pick up and move things, which is integral to making it past some parts in this game, whether it be smashing out windows with items or picking up objects or stuff like that. So when you're playing with the mouse, you don't get really any friction when you're picking up items or doing anything like that. It's just all freewheeling kind of gameplay, which I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate. When you're playing with the controller, which is the way I think it was designed to be played, because there's specific buttons mapped to run, and you have to hold a button down to run in cases where you need to run, or crouching is just easier in general to do, or leaning around a corner to see if a bad guy is there is easier to do on a controller because they're mapped to the bumpers. But when you try to pick up an item, which is what you're going to spend most of your time doing, sometimes the weight of the item there's some drag to it, which was weird after playing it with a mouse. Now, it makes sense, of course, if you're picking up a heavy chair. Simon, who's the main character, picking up a chair is harder for him to do. He's not going to be able to move it as fast. But when you can do it with the mouse, those inconsistencies kind of bothered me, especially because you have the scanner that you have. I can't remember the name of it.
The Omni Tool?
Omni Tool. That's right. Omni Tool. So when you're scanning it with the mouse, you can actually like swipe this thing at certain doors. But when you're using the controller, Simon just holds it in front of it and it doesn't swipe, and it still does the same thing. So that kind of pulled me out of the game a little bit, especially when I wanted to go to something easier than the mouse and keyboard, because of, using the shift key to holding down the shift key to run with WASD kind of irritated my pinky quite a bit. Yeah, it was a little weird, but this game's definitely a controller-based FPS.
Tell me you're a console gamer without telling me you're a console gamer. Like the fact that you're pointing out like having to hold down shift to run as being problematic is like I'm listening to you and I'm just like, if you've had to do that for fucking decades, what are you talking about? Like that's normal. Like
that's the wrong way to do things. At least I understood space was jump.
There you go.
So,
there you go.
Mike, what did you think about the gameplay overall?
I think the thing is that, kind of like I was saying before, gameplay wise and design wise, there's really not anything that insane going on. You're sort of, it's very rudimentary kind of first person navigation. Like Shane mentioned, Frictional have their own engine, proprietary engine, and they seem very, very proud of the physics on it. Because all of their games, you could pick up a whole bunch of things and throw them around. And I think only a very, very, very tiny fraction of any of it is actually useful. Most of it is just to kind of mess around. And that's, and to be fair, like that adds weight to things and that makes things more immersive. And, it is cool. I'm not knocking it, but I think I do understand how some people could be like, why can't I pick everything up? And it's just, I don't know, don't worry about it. But if you've played stuff like Amnesia or Observer or Outlast, nothing in here is going to surprise you too much. Like it's basically basic kind of stealth and hiding gameplay. I think the puzzles are relatively, solid. I think sometimes they're like a little strange, and there's definitely a few things that might feel like fetch quests. But again, I mean, I feel like we're all going to be saying this a million times. Like this game is one of those games where it's kind of more than the sum of its parts. Like if you look individually at stuff, you might think, oh, that seems kind of boring, but it kind of earns the right to kind of make me go fetch key cards, and once in a while have a puzzle that feels a little, this feels a little weird. I don't know if like, because some of the other puzzles and some of the other navigation are so well integrated in terms of the story and the world that you just kind of you put up with it. Like you're like, that's cool, that's fine, I really want to know what keeps happening, and you keep going. But in terms of the gameplay and controls, they're simple and rudimentary. In terms of the level design, it's passable. Like everything is just like, yeah, it's fine. When you kind of look at the game's skeleton and it just looks fine. It's fine. It's not amazing. It's okay. And again, like we've been saying over and over, it's kind of where the game takes you that really kind of sets it apart. I think my only real gripe about how it all came together, and even this is like a nitpick, is that kind of rewatching and replaying it again, I realized that it's not really, the game isn't really good, and I don't know if this is on purpose or not. Maybe this is on purpose, but it's not really good at giving you a sense of geographical place. And what I mean by that is that when you're playing BioShock, you don't know exactly the size of Rapture and what it looks like and where you are at any one time, but you kind of have an idea. Like, you kind of have an idea of how it all connects and, the scale of it. And I found in SOMA, like, I really didn't. Like, I felt like every place I was in was just, well, I'm in this other place now, and I have no idea how it connects and how it makes sense to this other area I was just in. And again, that could be on purpose, because they're like, well, you're hundreds of miles underwater, man, shut up. It's disorienting. Get over it. Like, that could be on purpose, and that's fine. And that's why I mean it's a nitpick. But I think that's one area where I think they could have done a bit of a better job, is kind of give it more of a sense of place, because I think the environment does have a personality and the environment is a character. And I think they could have done a little more with it, in the same way that Rapture is a thing.
I have to agree with you, man, because especially those underwater portions when you're traveling from location to location.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like the world isn't as connected as it should be. Especially at that, there is a part where you had to go into a ship to grab something or to do something. And why am I in this ship?
Yeah.
This makes, I don't know why. It has nothing, it doesn't feel like it really has anything to do with the overarching plot. I'm here because it feels like the game wants me to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you actually brought up one thing right there that I was going to say anyway, and that is, I think of all the locales in the game, the sections that sort of interconnect the different stations where you're out, like, on the sea floor, were the worst for me. Because I
agree.
I get what they're trying to go for, where you're like, oh fuck, it's super disorienting because you're literally at the bottom of the ocean and you're some fucking dude from Toronto. What the fuck do you know about walking around on the seafloor? Right. Like, I get it, but also from a player's perspective, it felt like every time I got to one of those sections, I just immediately wanted it to be over. I was just like, okay, God, all right, I'm going to have to wander around out here. This is going to drag because I don't know where I'm going. I have to dodge around these robots that kind of want to kill me. Like, they were probably the least favorite parts as far as navigating is concerned. But I think the gameplay, and this is not too different from, I think, what you guys have said already, is going to be where the majority of my gripes about this game are going to live. And I don't have many, but I think, as I mentioned in my personal experiences at the beginning, I had a pretty good sense of what I was getting myself into starting this game, having played some of Frictional's previous work. They're a lot like From Software in that way. Like, if you know Dark Souls and you kind of have a pretty good idea of what Bloodborne and like Sekiro are for the most part. The biggest single detractor for me in this game and every game like it is the whole like hide from scary thing because you can't fight it, wait for it to fuck off, and then continue searching for your MacGuffin or whatever gameplay loop. I really don't like that gameplay loop very much. And this is coming from someone who is a horror game fan. I enjoy horror games, but this particular style, I've never really been super into. And I think the biggest reason is because a lot of this stuff is heavily scripted, right? So like, if you fuck up an encounter with a monster, then invariably you're going to die because you probably can't defend yourself. And then you're going to have to replay that whole scripted sequence all over again, which immediately changes the feeling of the game from like this, brimming tension that you've been building to just frustration and like exasperation, like immediately. Scripted events are only scary one time.
Yeah.
After that, it's ruined. Yep. And I think you guys actually mentioned this a couple times in our notes, but it's a good point to make, which is if you're going to play this game, just play it on easy.
Yes.
Please just play it on easy. It's a game that you want to experience for the story, not for some sense of achievement by overcoming the difficulty. The difficulty is just going to be annoying. I guarantee it. But fortunately, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think this game relies quite as heavily on this mechanic as Frictional's previous efforts or other games like Mike mentioned, like Observer or what was the other one you said?
Definitely not as much
Outlast.
As like Outlast.
Oh God, yes.
Definitely not as much.
Yeah, I remember playing that one. That was I forced myself to finish that. But.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, that's to your point, Shane. And just play it on easy. It's not even that it's that bad. It's just that Soma's it's so good. You know, and you want to know what's happening so much that it's even more annoying when it happens. And you're just like, oh, I just want this to be over, like so I could just keep going. And play it on easy, get caught once. It's pretty spooky. It's pretty dope. But
True.
Afterwards, just keep moving and kind of experience that.
And to that point, about the monsters, I do want to talk about the monster encounters.
For sure.
Just based off what you're saying there. Now, that this is one of the reasons I found the game scary. Mm-hmm. And the only way it becomes scary is because if there's some risk, then the tension is going to build up. And if you do play it on easy mode, you are going to lose that risk when it comes to monster encounters. And it does just become a narratively driven game, which is fine because it's fantastic in that aspect. And I think we all agree on that. So once later in the game, once I figured out how the game wanted me to sneak around monsters and what I was supposed to do, then it's fine. But one of the game's biggest problems is it doesn't communicate to you how you're supposed to deal with the monsters.
Yeah.
Because you just can't, just my brief remembrance from Amnesia, like the 5-10 minutes I played of it, you just can't hide in a room and the monster is going to go away. You're going to have to figure out a way to get past these monsters. It's not hard when you know what you're supposed to do, but the game makes it a point of not telling you what you're supposed to do. And it was the very first monster in this game, maybe the second. It was the monster that can't see, but it can hear you. Mm-hmm. And it was in the ship that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
The one with it has a giant penis that you see, like just this big dong, just there it is. And the game doesn't like it. The best way to avoid this monster is to squat and face the wall, because if you see it, it will kill you. So, okay, squat, face the wall, and don't move. Okay, so you have to sit there forever, and it may pass you, it may not pass you. And then I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to do because the rules seemed to be inconsistent. Because sometimes it would walk by me and it would kill me. Sometimes it would walk by me and it wouldn't kill me. So this thing killed me about like 10 times. And then it went from being scary to being irritating to being infuriating as to what this game exactly wanted me to do with this specific creature to get past it. And then it didn't make it better that I had to run from this thing. And it didn't specify I had to run for this thing for like the entirety of the level in order to get away from it. Mm-hmm. So that specific instance, I could see someone getting that point on normal and put the game down permanently, because I almost did myself.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
It's very easy to do that. So there are problems with encounters.
What's interesting is I kind of laughed there because when you said, when you mentioned, okay, he's blind, but he can hear you. I think I was sitting there going, wait, one of them is blind? And that is, I think, to your point, exactly the problem. Like, they don't communicate well what the monsters can and can't do and what they're capable of and what you should be watching out for. At least not to my memory. I never even distinguished any of them. I just thought they were all, oh yeah, here's another one. Like, and I just kind of do the same thing. And again, I'm saying that because I agree. Like, I think that's a failing of the game that they weren't able to distinguish the creatures from each other, so you know exactly what you're dealing with. Like, the best games that do stuff like this, the monsters have clear silhouettes. They have clear animations and mannerisms and kind of sound cues that you know exactly, oh, okay, it's that one. And that's now I have to do this strategy in order to sort of deal with it somehow in this room. And that's where the fun comes from. But in this game, I mean, how do you know what their silhouettes are? You can't even look at them without losing, right? So it's kind of like and again, I know it's on purpose, but it's just one of those things where I agree with you, Chris. I'm just like, I don't, I think there were better ways that could have been handled.
All right. Anyone have anything else to say about the gameplay?
I guess the only thing that I'll kind of cap my thoughts off on this with is that I don't necessarily lay all of these alleged failings directly at the feet of Frictional Games. I think it's a problem with this particular style of horror game in general, and it's a hard problem to solve, such as it is, because if you're not going to give the character or the player the ability to fight back, and you're relying more on this, like, you need to avoid this thing because it's straight up going to murder your face, and that's where a lot of the horror of that particular aspect of the game comes from. I don't know, because I'm not a game developer, but like, I don't know how you properly quote unquote solve that, because you very quickly run into that problem of like, well, this encounter is going to be scary one time, and if you screw it up, then now it just becomes a trying to figure out the best method to just get past this so I can get on to the next thing. So I'm not blaming them specifically for that. It's more of an endemic issue, I think.
It's a really good point, because, you know, we're all talking about this, and it's very clear that I think it's really clear that even though we all really enjoy the game, we're not really into hiding. You know,
no,
we're not really into that. Like, no, but some people are. You know, some people really dig that kind of gameplay, and you know, so maybe for them, they're like, man, you guys are nuts. Like, I thought it was handled just fine. You know, it was exactly what I wanted out of it. So, I mean, it's a really good point to bring up, and I also think that I want to just be clear. You know, and I feel like you guys probably would feel the same, is that you shouldn't be scared away from this if this isn't your type of gameplay. I think that's kind of one thing we're really trying to get across, is that this is the point. The point is that none of us were really into this kind of gameplay, but we were still hooked on this. Like, we still wanted to see it through because of how good everything else is. And so that's still a recommendation, a glow off for it, you know, even if you're not into it. If you are into it, hell yeah, man. Like, you probably played it already, and if you haven't, you really should.
No, that is an excellent point. And yeah, actually, that's even more of a recommendation than anything for the game, to say that all three of us don't particularly like this style of gameplay, and yet we all wanted to see this thing to the end.
Yeah,
absolutely. Talking about seeing things.
Whoa.
Segues. We got them.
Let's talk about the presentation, how the game looked and how it sounded. So, Shane, I'll let you kick off this section.
Okay.
What'd you think?
Sure. Yeah. So just based on our notes, I don't think I was as particular about the graphical presentation as either one of you, or Chris in particular, I guess. I actually really enjoyed the look of this game. I thought it was beautiful. Like, everything was very crisp. The underwater environments were fantastic. The lighting was very well done. I really didn't have too much to complain about. Like, and if there was, it would probably be some pretty minor nitpicky stuff in my mind. Perhaps some of the character models may not be necessarily like the best. But I don't think that that's where the focus of this game really is, which in a way is like a commentary on the game's plot as a whole, I guess.
Right.
But no, I actually thoroughly enjoyed the presentation of it, both graphically and sonically, particularly the sound design. The sound design is fantastic in this game. And honestly, a game like this, where it is a very sort of atmospheric horror kind of game, kind of can live or die by how well the soundscape is designed. And I think they did a real bang up job here. Their overall ambiance, like all of the environmental sounds that you have in the sea stations while you're there, the, you know, locational noise of like the monsters or things that you think are monsters but are not, are fantastic. I think the music is very well placed, without being intrusive, which is something I know I've complained about in some games before, where they decide to rely on, you know, really loud music stingers to be like, this thing is scary. And this game doesn't do a lot of that, which I appreciate. And finally, the voice acting I thought was pretty exceptional, especially for what is considered like a kind of an indie dev shop. I think the actors that they got to play these roles, particularly the main roles.
Yes. Yeah.
Like Catherine and Simon in particular were just great. So I really don't have a lot to complain about here.
Mike, what do you think?
I think for me, some of the visual effects and processing that they were using for when you're spotted by the monster or those things, it's funny because to me, it's like I did find it kind of bothersome. I kind of wish there was a slider that you could sort of turn down. I want to say that maybe they have one. I don't remember. But the thing is again, your mileage may vary on that. Some people really don't mind it. It could just be a totally personal thing because, like, for example, I hate screen shake. Like, I really don't like when I'm playing even like a 2D beat 'em up or something, a retro game, and there's like a fuck ton of screen shake every time you do a massive hit in like a more recent game. I hate it and I turn it off. But some people are like, no, like it's good feedback. And I understand also why designers put it in. It is good feedback. It makes it feel like, this worthwhile hit. But there was a little bit of that. I mean, I remember some loading issues and performance issues, but I was on an Xbox One, like a base. I mean, I feel like by now, if you're playing it on a next-gen console or even like a decent rig, like you're not going to run into any of that. Like it's going to look and run great. When talking about qualitatively, about the sort of technical design, artistic design, like, Shane already mentioned the kind of human models are a little iffy, but again, like, come on, that's kind of not the focus of it. A lot of the technical design it's well done. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like super inspired, but I also think that's part of the idea. Like this is trying to be grounded relatively with some of the underwater stations, not with obviously some of the more kind of alien and organic elements, but when it comes to the actual, like, this is an underwater station, they tend to keep it pretty grounded. And I think it really works. We've already talked about frictional or vets with this stuff. I mean, they know what they're doing, man. Like they know when to put in a lighting effect to make the lights go off. They know when to put a little noise or to make, something scurry off in the dark to really freak you out. They're like experts at it at this point. So all that stuff, I think it really works. And I mean, the last little bit with the audio, I completely agree with Shane. Like, listening and playing it again a little bit, it was actually even better than I remembered to kind of listen to some of the voice acting. It's great because sometimes even when the voice acting does seem a little awkward, it might actually be intentional and it might actually work for it. And so those things keep you guessing and it's great. I think Simon, whoever did Simon, just props, man. Listening to his performance again, I think he really nails what is a really difficult script and character to play with some of the things they're saying. We'll get into it. I think there are a couple sequences that, still come across as a little, that doesn't seem like, what someone would say. But for the most part, it all feels like this is a relatively realistic reaction to what's happening. And his vocal reading is really well done. So I generally have really good things to say about it too. I can't complain too much.
I'll just start out with the audio because I'm pretty much in complete agreement with both of you. So I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I really think that the sound design was just fantastic, damn near perfect, especially when wearing headphones. Play this game with headphones, please.
Yeah.
Do that. Absolutely a must. Especially because even when you're safe, you feel like you're not safe with the way that they do the sound design. Like the banging, and you never feel 100% safe in this game. Yeah. So there's that. Now, in terms of the graphics, I think it looks like a mid-generation PS3 game. You can take that as a detriment, a compliment. Look, I'm not even saying mid-generation PS3 games look bad. Right. I don't have anything against them, but it just looks like a mid-generation PS3 game. The underwater sections, though, when you are underwater, I think those are breathtaking. I think they look phenomenal, especially some of the later sections, what they do with the lighting and what's going around at that time. I think they're great. It's when you're actually indoors and doing those kind of things, it does show that it's indie game nature. I know I spoke a lot about this earlier in terms of indie games, but let's be real. Indie games just don't have the same budget that AAA developers do, so they're doing the best they can. And it looks really good for what you would get from an indie developer. Just don't expect it to look like Ratchet and Clank, okay?
Right.
If you go and play this game, it's not going to be up to that level. It's still going to look good. It's just especially like Shane hit the nail on the head, is the character models. They do look out of the generation for a 2015 game. They do kind of take you back if you're not expecting it, which is fine. Again, I'm not bothered by it. I don't think many people are, because law of diminishing returns when it comes to graphics, in between like the PS3 era to now, it won't get in the way. And like Mike said, that's not the key focus of the game. The enemy models, for as much shit as we talked about them, that you barely can even look at them, they do look cool when you do get to see them.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Yeah.
They look really cool. That's all really I'm going to say on that. The graphics more than do the job. The lighting is fantastic. It's just the models itself are a generation or two behind even when it came out, and that's fine. It's fine. You're listening to a fucking retro gaming podcast, so if it bothers you, I really have some serious questions about why you can't get past it. But I understand. Some of you are younger and you like that PC Master Race mod. So, hey, look, hats off to you, but it shouldn't be an issue. All right. So if that's everything we have, I think it's time to take a break, and we will get to the spoilers. I think we're all looking forward to that part. I think that's the main reason we're all here today. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. All right, welcome back. And now it's time for spoilers, where we get to talk about the story and not have to worry about holding back or anything like that, like we've been doing for the past 30, 45 minutes or so. Like we can just let it fly.
Yep.
Thank fuck we can do that.
Painfully holding back. Chris, can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Hey, you out there listening to this, listening to this podcast while you're working and you're like semi-distracted and you're thinking maybe you're going to play Soma. We're about to spoil it. All right. Last chance.
Yeah. We're going to ruin everything.
Stop listening, man. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm not even part of this podcast anyway. Stop listening. Stop listening and go play it if you want to go play it. Because it's about to get real, like Bad Boys 2, bro.
Yeah.
We're going.
This is the entire point of the game. So if you just want to get our final thoughts, which, let's be honest, I think are fairly predictable at this point.
Yeah.
If you just want to hear our final thoughts, just like go to the end of the episode and go 5 minutes back.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how long this is going to go. I'm not going to say, and put at this point. No, this could go for a while.
Yeah.
Or it could go for short. Mm-hmm. We're going to find out. It's going to be a good time. Okay. So just to cut to the chase and just kind of kick it off. So everyone here knows, and if you're listening to this and you don't want to be spoiled because you want our perspective on this, we'll just say it. Simon's a robot. You don't necessarily know that at the beginning of the game because it starts you out and he's getting a brain scan because his girlfriend died. And then you wake up.
Wow.
And you're...
I was going to say, he wasn't a robot at that point. I feel like you should be
he wasn't a robot at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
It does do that. At the beginning of the game, he is not a robot. He is very much Simon. He's in Toronto. He is a human being in 2012, 2013. Because he dies in 2015.
Yeah. No. It's in 2015 he gets the scan.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because he also dies the same year. And that's throughout the gameplay plot. Because he has a brain hemorrhage.
Yes.
He's just continuously bleeding. And the theory behind it is the Dr. Munchie scans his brain and he's going to perform a bunch of tests on digital virtual Simon. And if it works on virtual Simon, his theory is it'll work on real Simon.
Yeah.
So you wake up, as Mike said earlier, and you don't know what the fuck's going on. And then you find out everyone's a bunch of fucking robots. And I'll just start it off like this. It's not quite clear if you are like in Simon's imagination, if this is just like a digital manifestation of him dreaming, or he got knocked out, or the experiment went wrong, or if it's really happening. And I think they did a phenomenal job on that opening portion and just establishing the baselines and make you start questioning things immediately.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't even find out that you are a copy of Simon's consciousness piloting around a mech suit until like roughly halfway through the game anyway.
Yeah.
Officially anyway.
Right.
What I love so much about the game and how it handles that whole situation is, and you touched on this in the pre-spoiler part, Chris, is that like the mystery isn't, is Simon really Simon? It's not that. Like you kind of get inklings very early on that, whoa, like something's up. Mm-hmm. Like something's not right. Like, you know, you get inklings very quickly of that. The real sort of mystery is kind of finding out, well, how did this even happen? And like what now? Like that's kind of the real mystery, because essentially, like Chris is saying, he goes to get his brain scanned, which serves as kind of a snapshot. It's like a digital picture. And so the idea is that digital picture, you think about it like me frozen in my mind frozen in cryo sleep. Basically, you got like that little vertical slice. And then he gets beamed into this robot that you don't know is a robot at the time. You just think it's you. So to Simon, it's literally been him closing his eyes and opening them, and he's there. In the same way that if you froze me solid right now and I didn't know it, and then moved me to Tibet, and then unfroze me, I'd be like, what how the fuck am I in Tibet? Okay, like, you know, so the idea is that this copy is now there, and how the game sort of slowly makes you realize what's going on and that Simon isn't who he thinks he is, so to speak, is so great, because because they really do show you his hands, you know, at the beginning when you're moving around, and they show you his body, and he's, you know, looks like a human being. Yeah. But as the game moves forward, and as Simon finds himself in more and more situations where he's, you know, underwater and he doesn't have to worry about breathing and all these things, his body starts to change right in front of him. And the first time you're playing the game, you don't know what the fuck is going on. You think, oh, maybe he's just hallucinating. Maybe this is all some kind of weird brain thing that happened because the scan triggered it. Like, you have no idea. But when you actually know what's happening, it all kind of makes perfect sense that his mind is filling in the gaps and seeing what he thinks he should see. Because if he actually saw the reality, like, it would just cause this, you know, schism, this mental break. I mean, imagine if you went from me sitting here and I close my eyes, and when I open them, I'm a fucking robot at the bottom of the sea. Like, just, you would go out of your mind, right? And I think that is kind of the setup to that.
Yeah, well, so the thing I wanted to touch on also that you just mentioned, being that, like, if you were to sort of have this realization that your consciousness is now no longer in your own body and is inhabiting a machine, that level of self-awareness would basically cause you to have a psychotic break, is something that they explore in pretty decent detail as you go through the game. As you come across these copies, essentially, of these consciousness of the folks who are working at this Pathos 2 facility, that's what the place was called, they are inside of these machines, but the ones that haven't gone completely off the deep end are the ones that essentially have had a lot of their self-awareness kind of removed. And it's an interesting commentary when you think about it, that level of awareness that we have of what we consider a self, we often look at as sort of like, you know, this very special and unique thing about us as human beings, and that it's a gift in a way that we have this awareness of ourselves, but it's also something that tends to tread along this very fine line of being potentially a major contributing factor to just completely losing a grip on, you know, whatever we consider to be our reality. Like, it is our awareness of self that is the reason that a lot of these people end up basically just cracking because, they can't reconcile what they want to believe and what is actually happening. And it's just, man, it's just one aspect of this plot where you just go down this rabbit hole of this like existential questions and like, it's so good. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but
No, that's fine.
That's okay.
So what Shane's kind of alluding to here about people cracking, and I think this is important. If you're listening to this and you don't care if you get spoiled because
you're in the spoiler territory. It's too late.
Yeah, you are mad in spoiler
Exactly.
territory.
So the world's ended, essentially. A comet has hit the Earth. All of human life is dead. And so Catherine, who is one of the researchers down at Pathos 2, has developed, Catherine Chun is her name, and she has developed this device called the ARC.
Right.
Which you can take these brain scans that they have developed in the 100 years since Simon got his done, and they can take that mental image and they can place it in this thing called the ARC. And they can do this because there's a thing called the WOW, WAU, or Warden Unit, which was designed and engineered to actually facilitate and, help make the facility in Pathos 2 run. And then it was shifted over to maintain human life once the comet hit and it went haywire. But anyway, the WOW assisted in the making of the ARC that you could store human brain scans in this thing. And essentially they live in paradise.
It's the metaverse.
Yeah.
Yes. So it is, you put yourself in the metaverse and you and Mark Zuckerberg hang out for all eternity, and he's selling your data to people, even though the world's ended and he can't make any more money, but somehow he still finds a way to do that. No, but they put it in the ARC, and they're going to launch the ARC into space where it could spend 5,000 years just hanging out, right? It's just how you get there. Now, what Shane was talking about when he's saying the concept of losing your sense of self causes people to crack is while they were doing these brain scans, some of the people started killing themselves, thinking that if they died, their consciousness would carry over into their digital selves within the ARC if they did it at the precise moment they did it, because they couldn't comprehend the fact that there was two identical copies of them just roaming around. And they try to meet that.
Yeah. Well, okay. We're just fucking going right into it. Okay. We're going ham. All right. So you're going into this whole concept that gets explained a little bit later as a theory called the coin flip, right?
Yes.
Which is like a huge like crux of this entire plot, really, where some of the people in Pathos 2 ended up killing themselves because, yes, they thought that they were going to basically, their consciousness would just move into the ARC and they would be a digital representation of themselves and they would go live on and be happy, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also another part of that I want to mention real quick, which is interesting. And it's one of the things that was brought up when I was kind of poking around on some retrospectives of this game prior to recording this episode, which I thought was a good point, which is the other part of why some of those people ended up committing suicide was not just that they thought that their consciousness would just sort of transfer to the ARC, but perhaps also some of them at least maybe could not come to terms with the realization that that human consciousness is not this special and unique thing, and that if this is true, if you can make for all intents and purposes, a perfect copy of who you are, who you think you are as a human being, and have it be this digital representation of it that lives inside of a machine, the implications of that are vast. Like, essentially, that means that regardless of what faith you happen to ascribe to personally, that kind of implies that a non-existence of an afterlife. That, like, if your consciousness is something that simply ends, then there really is no afterlife. And if you can, and sort of part and parcel to that, if you can successfully transfer your consciousness, which as far as most of us are concerned, is who we are. It's less about our physical body and more about who we are, in our brain and our personality. If that could be moved and you avoid all of the implicit suffering of a corporeal existence, then why bother, right? Like, why bother continue existing in a body that is going to break down and is going to cause you pain if you can just move over to a digital representation of yourself that has none of those things, which I thought was an interesting commentary on it. So I just wanted to bring that up. But
keep in mind that we all say robots, machines, everything like that. And what I think is very important is that Simon himself wasn't in a machine like everybody else was put into a machine. Mm-hmm. He was put essentially into a dead body that was mechanized. Essentially, he was put into a cyborg.
Yep.
And that also happens later. You just put a chip in someone's fucking neck and then put the neck back on and some structure gel, which is the stuff that, powers the WoW or consumes the WoW or something like that, and just inhabits another body that is essentially mechanized. I think that's an important point that separates him from the other robots, and I think there's some themes there. What do you think about that, Mike?
To me, that's what's so, what's interesting about that is that if you start going down this path, you start wondering, well, of how many of the robots, whether the servant ones, because because a lot of these sort of just, not even the big gonzo kind of ones that hunt you down and try to kill you, like the, why am I struggling with my words here? Like that, not the stars of the show, in terms of the monsters, they have, personalities. Who are they? Like, where did they come from? Like what kind of psychotic break are we talking about? Do they still deserve, do they not deserve to sort of go on the ark? Do they not deserve, whether they're a copy or not? Like the tiny robots that are floating in the deep that chase after you, the way that they interact with you and talk to you, they say stuff like, I just need some gel. Do you have any gel? And it's meant as a threat, and it's very clear you're not supposed to go near them. But Frictional have the presence of mind and the sharpness in terms of their narrative chops to be like, well, we're making it clear that all of these have some kind of fractured psyche, whether it's pieces of it or a copy that's been copied too many times or whatever it is. Like there's kind of someone or something in there. And there's plenty of times where you run into, and those are the most touching parts of the game. Like I know I'm jumping around a lot, I'm sorry, but like, this game is full of moments where you are interacting with the leftovers, with these, whether they're robots or cyborgs or like people strapped to the WoW that the WoW is keeping alive through the most kind of grotesque means. And in all of these cases, you are always it is never a good thing. It's always sad. It's always someone who is either, in pain, but they also don't want to be unplugged because they're that afraid to die. Like they're that afraid to it's just going to end. And to your point, Shane, it's like, imagine coming to terms with the fact that it is as finite as it is, and there is no afterlife. Imagine how much more terrified of dying you would be if you aren't predisposed to be like, you know what I mean? Because that's the other side of that coin, no pun intended, from what you're saying. The people who are like, well, what's the point? Fuck it, I'm going to kill myself. The other side of that is, oh my God, like, that's it? It's just over. It's over, like everything. And like, imagine what that would do to you. And you would be willing to live in perpetual pain, immobile at the ocean floor forever, rather than unplug. And like that to me is the fear. Like that's the terror is that feeling of like, holy shit, like imagine all of this kind of coming true and how terrifying that would be. Hopefully that kind of spoke to what you were saying, Chris. Sorry, man, I kind of went all over the place, but
no, it's fine. I mean, if you don't mind me jumping in for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
No, like, and so the other interesting thing that I think Frictional did an amazing job with was also sort of illustrating the various different ways that different people will try to cope with that realization. You have some of them, like you said, who are just like, okay, well, none of this matters, so I'm out. And then there's some who will just double down on like meaningless tasks just to stay productive, just to like sort of, distract themselves from that like stark reality. And then there's some who go in like the, cult direction. Like there's all manner of different ways that people try to cope with it. And I think it's very interesting to see those kind of manifest.
It's such a human, like that's where the game shines, is that Frictional, in a lot of other games, let's be honest, there are other games who have dealt with this kind of existential terror before. A big thing that I thought SOMA was going to be when I started playing it was, it's funny, it kind of reminds me of what you were saying at first, Shane, where you kind of thought it was going one way and then it went another. Like, I thought this was going to be a kind of a Philip K. Dick joint, kind of like Blade Runner or like, Total Recall, like kind of getting into what are memories? What does this mean? And that's not what this is at all. Like it really does not turn away. It's a very, that's the biggest, I'm not using the term right, but that's kind of the biggest irony of it all, is that this game is about being human. It's about it's about a human reactions to mortality and the fact that our time is finite, and what do you do with this time? Because and how do you spend it when you know it's going to end? And what do you tell yourself to placate that so you can just kind of go on living when you know everything is going to be over like one day? And I can't think of a more human thing. And that's what this game is all about. And Frictional does not, sure, it's still kind of dramatized and it's kind of played up emotionally for some things, but like we were saying before, a lot of the dialogue and the reactions, they're pretty grounded. They're pretty human. You can kind of expect people acting the way they do, and Frictional does not turn the camera away. Like they completely focus in. They focus, they go even further. They go, no, yeah, like we're going here. We're not going to turn away. Like what would you think if you are maybe, sitting next to literally the last alive human on Earth, and they're miserable, and like, what do you think that, are you going to pull the plug so they can be at peace? And the last two physical consciousnesses are just copies, brain scans of someone from 100 years ago talking to another brain scan. And that's it. That's the last of humanity. It's like, how do you deal with all that? And they don't turn away. They're the human reactions to it. And I know we're going to talk about Simon and Catherine because we kind of have to, but it's why I love the ending so much and why it's so haunting and it's so powerful, because the end of the game, I'll just say the end of the game is you shoot the Ark into space. Mm-hmm. And Catherine's like, yay, we did it. And Simon's like, but we're not on the Ark. And of which, of course, as the player, you knew this was coming. Like the entire time it's coming. And everyone knows it's coming except Simon. But is that true? Like, or is it just that Simon just couldn't admit it? Like he just couldn't.
He couldn't come to terms.
He didn't want to come to terms with it. And so the last moments of the kind of official ending of SOMA is two people screaming at each other, like in anger and frustration and loneliness, before they're cut off forever. And that's it. And it's beautiful because it's such a human thing. Like the way that Simon reacts is frustrating, but it's also so human. It makes so much sense. It's so relatable that he would be that angry and that he would be like, fuck those people up there. Fuck them. That should be us. Like it's that anger is so real, and it's such a human reaction to knowing that you're sort of doomed. And Catherine's reaction to him, this kind of sanctimonious, like, well, I think what we did was, noble and everything, and why don't you understand that? And you're so selfish and all this stuff. It's another reaction that we understand, but we also it makes sense that it would make Simon even more pissed off, because we're just like, fuck you for thinking that. Like, I want to live. But it's kind of what I love about the ending and about all of this and what we've already touched on. It's just like Shane's saying, it's these reactions, these very human things about facing death and like certain doom, and what do you do with that, and how do you react in a situation like that. And I just love that Frictional really had the guts to kind of linger, to just put the camera on it and roll the tape and go, yeah, like we're not pulling away. There's not going to be some kind of fancy cool thing, because I would argue even the post-credit sequence, which I'm sure we'll talk about, there's a lot underlying that. It's not a happy ending.
No. And man, I got a bunch of other things to say, but we were talking about the ending now, and just this fucked me up for a while. Like, I'm not even going to lie. Like, it is not often that I will kind of sit in like a stunned silence at the end of a game, but this was absolutely one of them. And even though you do, as the player, kind of see this coming, certainly a lot more than Simon does, or what he will allow himself to see might be a little bit more accurate. It's still, the impact of it is just huge. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to just kind of note about that, because it is just, it's so well done. But like, I had to sit there and think, like, if I were Simon, right, would I be happy for my other self, that is on the ark? Could I bring myself to do that? Could I be that selfless that I would say, like, well, you know what, at least they made it up there, even though that's, I guess, a version of me, but it's not the me, because the me is sitting right here still at the bottom of the ocean, and that's kind of fucked. But like, can I be happy for that other version of me that's going to be able to get away from all of this? And I don't know if I could, or would I just be bitter and horrified about it, like I think he kind of is?
Very much so. Not even kind of. He's very bitter and horrified about it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to note was just the exclamation that Simon has when he's just saying, like, they're not us, is like, it's a very deceptively simple statement, but it's actually extremely profound. Because that right there, those three words kind of encapsulate almost everything about what this game is trying to say or trying to make you think about. It's like, well, but are they though? Because that is you, that is Simon. It's not the Simon that's sitting there wondering why he's not on the ark, but it is a version of you. So is that still you, or is that someone else, or is it a person at all? Do we consider that to be a human at all? What defines a human being at that point?
And they do a fantastic job of foreshadowing that too throughout the game.
Oh yeah.
Because at one point, I don't know if this is before or after another point I'm about to bring up, Simon is talking to Catherine. He's just like, well, how do we know there isn't just a bunch of Simons and Catherines walking around in robots right now? How do we know whatever put me into this robot didn't put a copy of me into a bunch of other robots, or a bunch of Catherines into other robots? And what are they? Are they me, or am I them, or am I the only me? Am I unique? And they have this big conversation about that. The other thing, when it comes to, and this is the other point that I was bringing up, and this relates more to the ending where you're talking about where Simon is horrified and he's frustrated that it's not him. They explore that when Simon gets the option to kill a previous Simon, when he copies himself over from the original body over to the power suit body.
Yes.
And he's sitting, that body is sitting there in the chair, and he's talking to Catherine. It's like, well, what's going to happen to that Simon? Oh, he's going to be unconscious, and he's going to wake up in a few days, and he's just going to be walking around.
So terrifying, man. It's so scary.
I was like, whoa. Yeah. And you have the option whether or not you're going to kill that Simon, and by kill, you just turn off, or you let them find their own device when they wake up, not knowing where they're supposed to be, or they failed the transfer. So Simon knows that this is going to happen, but he just holds out hope that the copy that he's currently in is going to be the copy that transferred over, because originally he was the copy that transferred over. So why wouldn't he be again?
Yeah.
So in that instance, did you guys kill Simon, or did you leave him to wake up?
Oh God, that's the thing. Is like that's such a crazy moral choice to make, right? Because like
so good.
Because on one hand, you're like, okay, well, I don't want to kill somebody. I mean, I guess this is a person, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is a person. So do I want to make the choice to murder this person, which is essentially what it comes down to? Or do I not do that? But also, if I don't do that, am I not just dooming them to this shit existence of living at the bottom of the ocean? Like, oh my God. Like, I actually ended up pulling the plug on that, because I was like, I do not want to give this person that existence. That sounds horrifying.
Yeah.
Was there ever an instance that you guys didn't pull the plug in the times that you had options to?
I don't think so.
I know that I think most of the time, I think other than that one, and you can make a choice at the beginning, near the beginning, where one of the robots, actually the first one you really interact with, he's kind of caught in this machinery, and to proceed, you have to basically do something that's going to cut him in half and kind of kill him anyway. And so you're given the choice as to whether you just do that immediately to get through. I think it's you get a choice to either do it immediately with him on or off. But if you turn him off, then you you can never turn him on again. So like the concept is that he's saying, okay, turn me off, but then remember to turn me on, right? And you're like, yeah, sure. Of
course.
It plays with those things, and it's awful. The game is full of these awful choices that never feel good, and there's no right answer. And I can think of a couple games that maybe have one or two of these in the entire game, but Soma is that. Like the entire game is this conflict. It's this conflict of what are you prepared to do to kind of proceed and to save what you think is your consciousness, which is your consciousness. But how many other consciousnesses are you willing to forego? How many of them are you willing to dumb down and to just say, oh, they're just a robot. Oh, they're just a copy. I'm not. I'm special. I'm me. And it's like, that's, I think, the other layer that the game is trying to tell us is it's trying to say, like, look at how Catherine at some points, Catherine is such a crazy character, man. Like or the copy of Catherine is such a crazy character. Like listening to it again, I'm like, I can't figure it out. I think she's the villain. I think she's the bad guy. Like it's amazing. And basically,
she's driven by ambition.
She's driven by this goal of like, if we do this, like this is productive, this is worth something if we send this off into space, and she's willing to do anything to get to that point. So is she just as much someone who is telling herself what she wants to hear and stepping over all these other people at her chance to win the coin toss as Simon?
Like, I feel like that's her coping mechanism.
Yeah. You know, her coping mechanism is, no, I did this for the good of everything. And that's what I think is so great, is that, Simon kind of calls her on it, but she in turn calls Simon on the fact that, like, well, you're just clearly doing this for yourself, but, kind of hiding behind this sort of other thing. And it's kind of what blows my mind the most about her character and kind of how sort of she deals with it. But anyway, there's something that you just mentioned there that I kind of wanted to highlight too, which is that I think this game does a great job of sort of bringing to the forefront that notion that it is of just how easy it can become to make those what are essentially life or death decisions when the people, such as they are in question, are sufficiently dehumanized. Yes. Yeah.
And that is a big thing that I think isn't necessarily like explicitly thrown in your face. It's not like super heavy handed about it, but because you you are sort of forced to make those decisions in order to even progress the game. I mean, there are instances where you have to unplug these machines that are, keeping a human being alive or are, a human consciousness inside of that machine, that you have to turn them off in order to progress to the next area. That in some way does become almost easier when, you don't necessarily consider them to be human.
Yeah.
And it's also crazy that, you make these decisions about not only other people or versions of those people, but yourself, and how easy it is, and how quickly the version that wins the coin toss is just like, yeah, no, I'm here. This is cool. And like, well, I guess fuck that other guy. Like, even though it's you, like, like you're saying these things about yourself in a way, which is insane.
It's I love that you brought that up, because it's such a part of, if in the post-credit sequence, I'm just going to go there. Stop me now.
Yeah.
But in the post-credit sequence, you see the Ark.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you play as Simon on the Ark in the metaverse, hanging with Zuckerberg, and you meet Catherine. Okay, and in a beautiful, I didn't catch this until watching it again, but the questionnaire is so awesome by the time you get to the Ark. It's so good, especially since I completely forgot that you actually run in the questionnaire in the game.
Yes, yeah.
Like very early on, I completely forgot. And so by the time I got to the end, I was like, oh my God, the questionnaire. And all of a sudden, it's so much more real. Like in the beginning, sorry, I jumped around there, but earlier in the game, you see the Ark. Okay. And it's because it's a thing. Like, you pick it up and you look at schematics on it, and it talks about how it sort of says, oh, here's a questionnaire for when you enter the Ark, if you have any questions about this process or blah, 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 that kind of thing. And it's such a good way, because when you're looking at the Ark at that moment earlier in the game, it's still a MacGuffin to you. It's still like this is just a thing. This is the goal of the game. We're going to shoot it in space. Yeah, whatever. It's just a thing. But by the end of the game, and you're on the Ark, and you did all that work with the other Simon, and then you're there as the Simon who won the coin toss, all of a sudden the context is totally different. The vibe is completely different. And you're sitting there, and as the player, there's such a sense of survivor's guilt of this, like, oh my God, they're stuck there. But to Shane's point, what's so great is that the people on the Ark, they don't think about it at all.
Yep.
And that is the ultimate. And I know, I promise I'm going to go somewhere positive with this by the end of this discussion, but I can understand why someone would say, Jesus, Frictional, that's fucking cynical, man. That is some nihilistic shit, like that you are, that, are you guys really saying that? Like, what are you guys trying to say? That these people, to your, exactly echoing what you said before, Shane, it's like, how much are you willing to rationalize and be okay with? Oh, well, fuck them. They're not me now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm this other, fuck them, and it's, what does that say about us, like, as humans, and how does that carry over to your own consciousness? But we do it to plenty of other people too, like in the sense of the other. And all of these things are things that you feel when you're playing this game, and the questions that get raised. And that's why it's, a fucking masterclass.
And that's not even like, we haven't even necessarily talked much about, I guess the more, let's say tropey stuff, because I don't want, that sounds reductive, so I don't necessarily want to say that, but that's not even touching on all of the other questions that this game sort of brings up about what truly constitutes a human consciousness. Like, if it's something that can be replicated by a machine, like, at what point is a sufficiently aware computer a human? When do you consider it to be a human, or do you? Like, what is your definition of that? Like, and if a machine contains a copy of a human's consciousness, is it not entitled to the same basic rights that we give all other organic human beings? Like, what differentiates those two?
exactly.
It's going down like the Philip K. Dick route.
Right, exactly. Which is why I was saying it's
stream of electric
maybe a little bit more tropey in that way. But they're all still perfectly valid questions, I think.
And it's
sure.
And the examples here, again, this isn't not to throw shade at Philip K. Dick or any of his works. They're awesome.
Fuck that guy.
But again, like SOMA doesn't just go, yes, it's happening in this cyberpunk dystopia, and there's this really hot model who's an android. Like, we're talking, no, like this is real life. This is some kid from 2015, and like this is really happening. It's a real person. Like, how do you deal with this? They put the context is in this more grounded, realistic, grim, terrifying kind of reality. And again, you feel like Frictional is just grabbing your head and twisting your neck and making you look at it and making you go, no, don't look away. Like, keep thinking about it. Like, that's the horror, you know?
And there is one thing before I forget about it, and I know we're kind of jumping everywhere, but I think we're covering everything pretty sufficiently, but there's just so much to talk about. But when we had started talking about the ending, you made a fantastic point, which was a lot of Simon's reaction especially is like exceedingly human. It's something that we can all relate to, right? That you totally would be, I mean, most of us, I would imagine, would be irate at the fact that like, well, why is it not me? Why I went through all of this? Why don't I get the spoils of victory? Why am I stuck? But what's also something that I noticed that is also just tragically human in a way is that you mentioned like the last moments that these two people, such as they are, spend together are being angry at one another. But then as soon as Catherine is gone, like almost immediately, Simon just changes from like, fuck you, fuck this is bullshit, to be like, please don't leave me alone. And that's the last thing you hear.
Oh, it's
like,
good.
Oh my God.
It's extremely, it's nuts. It's nuts. And the only thing I can hope is that Simon dies.
Yeah, I mean,
that he's shut
that's
off.
Best case scenario, right?
Remember, kind of going back to that. So there's this character named Ross, who's essentially, he's one of the monsters. So the monsters in the game are they're infected. They're previous like real humans infected by the WoW. And now they are monsters. So Ross is one of these people, but he's just like a very heavily evolved version of these monsters where he can think and he can act and he still has his humanity about him. Ross is one of the researchers, of course, that you find later in the game, and he helps you go destroy the WoW because he doesn't want the WoW infecting everything. So one of the things that he says after you take the structure gel down to the WoW to kill the WoW and poison the WoW that everything dies, he says, now I have to kill the last thing that will not die because it's a new variant that I'm spreading the WoW. Hold on, Simon, I'll make this quick.
Yeah.
So what he was saying is that the WoW will die, Simon will not, and Simon will carry on a new variant of the WoW. So you can take that into consideration. Also, while going to the game, Catherine is now gone because she's part of the WoW, the old WoW that got poisoned and shut down the facility. Simon has the potential of not being dead at the bottom of the ocean in just pure darkness.
Yep.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's even more to chew on.
Yeah.
So it's nuts.
It's just, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, as a side note, just as a quick, that's another cool question, right? Is like, how does the WoW tie into this? Because even when you think about it, like the WoW is so awesome, because I could understand even me, like anybody playing it and going, well, what the fuck is the point of this thing? because it creates these spooky monsters, I guess, and stuff, and it's doing this creepy shit, keeping humans alive. But at the end of the day, the culminating thing is shooting the Ark into space, like it's not really about shutting down this WoW. But the thing is like thematically it is, because thematically the WoW is just one more thing that is like keep humans alive at any cost, like anything but death. Even the machine is kind of corroborating that behavior. I mean, people have programmed it to do that, but still it's doing that. And what does that say about our instinct of survival, our desire to to, you know, survive no matter what, at the cost of like, whether it's literally unplugging people or dehumanizing people, like Shane is saying, like that connection is there too, which is awesome. It's this idea of like, you know, AI construct, which has no concept of the stuff of the same kind of like determination to survive as we do, but at the same time, it's still hot wired to do that. So does that mean that like we're just following programming by wanting to survive, and it's just another coping mechanism that we're using to kind of hide that, you know, like that we're just a bunch of ones and zero, you know, organic ones and zeros, you know, built to survival? I don't know, man.
Are we deterministic beings, or do we actually have free will? That's like a whole other question there. Right. And what's crazy about this too is like, I mean, I don't want to be, you know, I guess trumping up this game too much, but I honestly think it really deserves it. But I feel like a lesser game could have skated by on just the story about the WoW.
Yeah,
it totally could have. Sure. Like that piece alone could have been a different game, where it's just like, yeah, there's this AI that, you know, was programmed to preserve human life, but, you know, it doesn't have a sense of morality. And so it takes it to the extreme to literally hooking up humans to these things and keeping them alive, even though they're in excruciating pain and they just probably want to die. That could have been a game all by itself, but that's like a footnote in the overall story of SOMA, which is crazy.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things throughout this discussion I started realizing, and just Mike, as you said, when you get into when you first become Simon after the brain scan, and you get the survey about what it's like to be in the WoW, because that's when they give it to you. They give it to you immediately. What's it like to be in the Ark? Right then and there.
Oh,
like that's one of the first things you can do.
I thought it was later. Oh, my bad. Sorry.
I might be wrong. I could be remembering. I thought it was like as soon as you get into the underwater station and you have to get the, you know, the fire hydrant throw through the window and it's teaching you the mechanics and stuff. It's in that room. So you get that again on the Ark. And then I started thinking, is this game just saying that everything is a simulation? And one of the things that leads me to believe that again is when I started playing the game ended up crashing at me when I got to Dr. Munchie's office.
Oh,
it just crashed.
Oh, yes. That's weird.
It is weird.
Yeah.
But he got stuck. The door wouldn't open. I couldn't get into the door or whatever. I had to restart the game. I'm like, okay, no big deal. The weird thing, now that I look back on everything, and I didn't know the purpose behind it. I thought that there was a purpose. Maybe there is that when I restarted the game, all the items Simon needed to grab were in different locations.
Huh.
So like there would be an item that was on the counter in my first playthrough, but in the second one it was in the bathroom behind the mirror.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa.
I did not know that.
So the item placement for what you pick up when you start the game is RNG.
Oh,
so when you take into the consideration that after the brain scan, you go into a new location and you do a survey, and the first thing that happens after you do another brain scan at the end of the game is you go into a new location and you do a survey.
Yeah.
Is anything that is happening throughout any of the game even happening? Did the world really end, or is it a simulation that you're going to a simulated world ending, and then that person, like Inception, is going into another simulation where the world is starting again?
Yeah.
And was Simon in a simulation to begin with?
So what I love about this, number one, I didn't know that, so that's fucking amazing. Thank you for telling me that. But also, like, think about this, right? Like, we're talking about all of the more existential sides of it, and there's all this depth there, and there's just room to explore. But also from the point of view, the existential point of view, in terms of like transferring consciousness and what's real and what isn't, that's also happening, right? Like, as per Chris, what you're just saying, like there's so much you can dig into in this game. It just feels like it's, I don't want to say it's effortless, because that's kind of demeaning, I'm sure, the massive amount of effort they put into to kind of crafting all this, but it really does sort of just feel like all of it is organically kind of coming out of this one concept. And it's just another reason why, if I ever meet the guy who wrote it, I'd be like, why didn't you quit? Like, after this, just stop. You did it. Like, Like, I don't know what you think you're gonna do after this, man. Like, but and I didn't know that. I didn't know that about the other place.
Maybe
it's blowing my mind.
Maybe Simon died before the game, or is dying, and they just transferred his consciousness into a simulation. He is going through the simulation that Dr. Munchie wanted to do to him to figure out how he was going to get better.
I mean, it's just
there's so many possibilities.
Yeah, now my head hurts.
now it does. Okay.
Now it does.
So
I mean, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shane.
Oh no. Well, why don't you go ahead? Because there's one thing that I feel like we probably ought to at least explain a little bit that we mentioned a couple of times, but we haven't said it.
Well, go ahead, because I kind of want to. I sort of want to ask. My question is a little more of a final question, I think. So go ahead.
So the one thing that we've been bringing up a number of times is the coin toss.
Yes. Yeah.
And we haven't really talked about what that actually is. So I feel like we should at least briefly mention that. So essentially what it is it's this theory that you come across during the game where the notion is at the moment that a consciousness is copied, for the briefest of moments, there are two identical copies of you. And almost immediately, those two will then diverge just based on their different experiences and essentially become two different versions of you. And it's during that time where basically until the scan occurs or is completed, you can't really tell, or can't really say rather, whether you're the original or not. And so that's sort of where this metaphorical, I suppose, coin toss occurs. And that's how Simon that you're playing as is the one that ends up kind of getting left behind, and the other one goes off into the Ark because you lost this metaphorical coin toss and you ended up being the consciousness that's still in the machine at the bottom of the ocean. Did I explain that pretty well?
Yeah.
Or? Okay.
I mean, what a great way to kind of get I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's like, oh, it's perfectly simple, like to understand this when you play the game. Like, it's still kind of a head scratcher.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, it's such a good way of kind of simplifying this concept to somebody in a way that they're going to be like, oh, okay, I get it. Because it's kind of like, no. Like, okay, think about it. Like, I flip a coin, and wherever the coin lands, okay, if it's heads, that means the copy of you is going to go on the Ark. If it's tails, that means you're going to go on the Ark.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, did you lose the coin toss or not? Kind of thing. It's such a... I love it, and Ken Levine, I know you're not listening, but fuck you, and that's how you write a story about coins, and okay, that's how you write a story about coin tosses and Destiny. Okay, it's not with your crap. It's like stuff like this.
You wanted to touch on something, Mike.
I did want, yeah. I mean, there's one question I wanted to ask, and it's a little corny, and it's kind of I'm being a little rhetorical because I know my answer for it, but I kind of want to get yours because I kind of touched on this before because I was thinking about this game. I was thinking about this game because I knew we were going to talk about it, and I was really depressed. I was like, man, this game is heavy. It's such a heavy game. It's kind of, it can completely understand how it could be like a cynical kind of take, a real nihilistic take. Even the people who get away on the Ark, is that really where you'd want to be? Like floating in space in a fake world? And, would the guilt catch up with you that you left all these other people behind who had just as much a right to be here as you did? And I realized, I was like, there's too much love in this game. Like, there's too much love in this game. There's too much tenderness that's afforded to these human moments that I think there has to be not I don't want to say uplifting, but there has to be some kind of message that Frictional is trying to say. They can't just be saying, fuck it, who cares? Life is meaningless. It's a flip of a coin. We're all going to die. Like, I don't buy it. I don't buy that that's actually what the kind of moral is, or the meaning, or the ultimate thing that they're trying to say with this. I don't think that I don't think they're trying to say that it is meaningful and that everything's hunky-dory and we're all going to go to, in space on the Ark. I don't think they mean that. But I also don't think they want us to walk away from this feeling like there's no point to anything. And I'm just wondering, I feel like you guys probably agree, and like, what do you think this game was trying to say? Like, what's the takeaway from this?
For me, it comes down to, when like writing a college paper, the difference between a thesis statement and a thesis question. I think that SOMA is a thesis question because at the end of the game, again, going back to the survey they ask you, I think it's more Frictional Games asking you the question, was this worth it? Is everything that the Ark accomplished launching it, is it worth it? Is this really humanity up in space? Can consciousness be humanity, even if it's not what we commonly define or view as humanity? It's to ask you the question to ask yourself, and to look at a situation that if you had a copy of yourself in another device, in a robot or another being, so to speak, would that really be you? And is that worth preserving? And I think that's what I mean by it's more of a thesis question than a thesis statement, because it's for you to make that determination. That's why you have the surveys. It's not telling you what to think. It's asking you to think. Yeah. It's demanding that you think. And that's what they're trying to accomplish, that you think about these things and how AI relates to a human experience and whether or not it is real or not. And that's for you to determine.
I like that. I actually don't think I can add too much more to that. That you put that pretty well. I think I feel kind of the same way, that it's not so much that I don't think Frictional is trying to make a statement about anything at all, actually. I think it's more they're just asking you to ask those questions and to really actually think about, some of the conundrums that they present, because there are quite a few. Like there are moral implications, there are ethical implications. I guess thinking about what is or is not human, and how do you personally define that?
No, I like that. I like that a lot. For me, I mean, now that you guys said that, that makes a lot. It makes a lot of sense for me. I mean, I think for me, it's I'm gonna piggyback a little bit on what you guys are saying. I definitely think that's part of it. I want to believe, and this is just the corny kind of romantic in me, but I want to believe that whether this was the main focus or not, what they're kind of trying to say is like, none of us know when or when. None of us, like, all of this is a drop in a bucket. Like, it doesn't mean anything except for one thing. The only thing that means anything is how we interact with each other. Like, that's it. That's the only thing that can carry over. That's the only thing that has weight, because in this world where your consciousness can just get copied over and there could be another you, and it's so hard to define like who you are or what you're doing or what the point of anything is. The only thing that you can do that can feel like it has, like it's for its own sake, and it's not just busy work. It's not just you distracting yourself until you're dead. The only thing is, like, you can be kind to someone else. You can react to someone else. You can be there. And that's not to say in the game that you always do that, because you definitely don't. That's the point. Like, in the game, you're doing all these things that are not kind. You're doing all these things that are pretty, reproachful in some ways when you think about it. But to me, it all culminates with that final scene where it's like, this is it. This is how we go out. Like, we go out yelling at each other. And to me, if maybe, again, very romantic, very poetic and melodramatic, but like, to me, I want to believe that Frictional, the writer, is trying to say, like, if this is how we go out, we can't go out yelling at each other. Like, this is like, we gotta be there for each other. We gotta, because that's the thing is, like, I mean, that's why it's so human that they both react the way they do. But it also is why, like, the other side of that is they could have been there together with each other, and just, it doesn't mean you're happy about it. It doesn't mean you're excited, but it's just, in these last moments, let us comfort each other instead of, yelling at each other because we didn't win the toss. I don't know, man. It's just another reason why I kind of love this game, is because I think that's a really fucking awesome take on it too, because it absolutely is. I think the main crux of what they're doing is again, poking a microphone in your face going, well, what do you think about this? And like you're not looking away. Like, think about it. Like, think about what this would mean, and think about what this means. Take this over into your real life and how you think about other people who aren't you. What makes them less important? What makes them more important?
Yeah, but I do really like your take on it, though.
That's good.
Yeah, like I think that is an important consideration too. And the thing is like you see that with Simon, right? Like I mentioned earlier, like immediate regret. As soon as Catherine's not there anymore, then he's like, oh shit, like I had somebody here and now she's gone. And I would like to think that at some point, probably very soon after those last moments, he was thinking about that exact thing of like, fuck, like the last other person that I could have had with me. And this is what I did. This is how I spent those last few moments.
All right. I think that's a fitting cap to this episode. We can go to final thoughts, but I think this is all recommend from all of us. We really don't have to get into that.
Yeah, fucking what? Yeah. Like, I don't, you know what? You should pay full price for it, frankly. But like, if you're going to get it on sale, then that's even a better reason. But this thing, and this, I'm sorry, I just immediately launched into my final thoughts. Go. But I just have a lot of feelings. No, but honestly, man, this game, and it's funny too, because I'll be real about this. I haven't thought about SOMA in a while, because like I said, I played this like 5 years ago or something. But now that it's all been brought back to the surface, this game is criminally underrated. Like nobody talks about it anymore. I mean, after that initial kind of, influencer hit of everybody talking about it on YouTube or whatever, I feel like nobody mentions it. And in some ways, and I know this is going to sound perhaps a little hyperbolic, but in my opinion, this game stands pretty high in the pantheon of horror games, or just games in general, really. But horror games especially, like it's right up there with some of the ones that people like to talk about all the time. I mean, hell, I even do, like Silent Hill 2 or something like that. Like,
oh, you said it.
I said it. Yes, I'm going to go there, especially as a Silent Hill 2 fan myself. But like, the story this game tells and how masterfully it does it, the characters that it builds, and the philosophical questions that it forces you as the player to consider, it puts it at a whole other level that I don't think it gets the recognition for that it should. And like we've talked about it at length now, but man, the ending of this game, like if you've been following along the whole time and like the how and why of the coin flip and the commentary on consciousness that's been running throughout that whole game, you will be existentially ruined for like at least a couple days after this 100%. Game. But that in itself is like a mark of such a fantastic story that it's going to leave you with that much of an impression.
Yep.
Absolutely. I guess I'll give Mike the final word. I'm just going to echo pretty much everything Shane said here. It's a great game. I would say this is the bane of indie games just in general, because even though it's like everyone's like, oh, this is a big YouTube phenomenon, I missed it. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear anything about this game. I didn't hear anything about this until Mike brought it up on the Region Free Gamers episode back in October of 2021. I think it was October 2021. I was gallivanting all around the States at that time, so who knows. But that was the first time I heard of it. So it's not just criminally underrated, it's just criminally overlooked. It's not discussed enough. No one talks about it. And it is a game I think everyone needs to go out there and experience one way or another. Again, play this game on easy. Don't fuck around with the fucking baddies, because they will ruin your time. They will make some people quit this game if you play this in a normal. Just play it on easy. You're playing this for the plot. Play it for the plot, play it for the atmosphere, play it for the experience. Go get this game. Yeah, full price, it's worth it, but you can always get it super cheap. $2 Canadian, as Mike said, which is like they give you a Coke out of the vending machine for free. Yeah. So that's what it is. And Mike, you as our guest, I'll let you have the final word. Oh, by the way, killing Kate was the most horrific thing in the entire game for me. Yeah. The cute little robot. That was the worst part. And you don't even have to do it, and that made it even worse. But I will let Mike have the final word.
I mean, in terms of level design, in terms of the raw mechanics, the game feel, the gameplay, this is as average as it gets. You know, like but it's elevated, like we've been saying, by the characters, the dialogue, the narrative, how it all weaves in and out, the questions it makes you raise. The way Shaden put it perfectly, this game stays with you. If you get hooked by it, it is going to stay with you. You're going to think about it. It's a game that you're going to think about a couple of years later all of a sudden, and you're going to have a little trouble sleeping that night, a little bit more. And in my humble opinion, like, just an absolute masterclass in doing this. And it's not that, yes, there have been some YouTube dissections, as you guys have said. It's not that those aren't good. It's not that those aren't detailed. There should just be more. There should, there's more to say about this. There's more people who should check it out and play it if it's their bag, if it's something they're into. I wonder how much of it being overlooked is because, like, this is something, I don't want to get on a tangent too hard, but it's something kind of fun that I think about sometimes, is that this is such a game where, spoilers, going in as blind as possible is the best way to do it. So is this a game that got hurt by that? Because so many people were like, oh, I can't tell you anything about it, but just play it. It's so amazing. And they were just like, yeah, it looks all right, I guess. And then they just didn't give it a shot. I don't know. Like, I kind of wonder, did that have something to do with it? As a small, funny pro tip, playing this during the initial heavy quarantine lockdown was extra awesome and depressing when I actually did it. But in any case, yeah, I'm just going to be echoing what you guys are saying. Like, it's just such a kind of a beautiful game, and just makes you ask questions that you kind of never have before. And I think that anybody who is a fan of feeling really strong emotions and dealing with these kind of high concepts in a game setting where they handle it really well, like, I think it's just an absolute no-brainer. It's definitely worth the money, and it's on sale a lot. Like, just do it.
Yeah, and just real quick, I think what you mentioned, I think that might be partially true about, like, the spoiler-heavy nature of the game. I think the other thing that just popped into my head, at least for me, that might have been a detractor for some people is the fact that Frictional kind of does the same thing a lot with their games. Yeah. And so I think maybe folks who may have experienced or at least heard of, like, Amnesia, and to a lesser extent Penumbra, probably kind of just went like, oh, it's one of those, and just passed it by. And that's especially a shame
after Bay of Pigs,
right? Because there's a lot more here than in some of those other games.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this up. Once again, Mike, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you stopping by, especially because of the recommendation. I couldn't think of anyone else to share this episode with, so thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me, guys. This has been a ton of fun. Really fun.
So in case this gets out right now, this is behind the paywall to all our patrons at the buck level. So once again, thank you for being our patrons. Yes. But in case this gets outside that, Mike, do you want to plug the Region Free Gamers podcast if they don't already know about it already?
Region Free Gamers podcast, a podcast fluent in gaming. You can tune in for hot takes, deep cuts, me trying to ruin everything by bringing up really obscure, stupid things, but mostly Paul, Arnie, and Kelly being very lovely, entertaining, and charismatic. And tune in. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. We'd love to have you around. We also got a Linktree too, and a Discord if you're curious.
Sweet. So Shane, I guess you could just briefly wrap this up, because this is for the patrons, and I'll just let you roll with whatever outro you want to give it.
Cool. Well, I mean, y'all are paying to be here, so I don't need to pitch shit to you, but I mean, also thank you for being here. But I suppose if this does make it out into the wild somehow, then, you can find us via the link tree as well. It's what all the cool kids are doing, So if you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, actually, this is not that bad. Maybe these guys are all right. And you can head over to linktr.ee/retro hangover, and that will give you this nice little menu where you can go wherever you want. You can check out our socials. You can come to our public Discord. You can check out the Patreon. You could have been listening to this earlier if you were there. So, if you want exclusive or timed exclusive content or what have you, that's the place to go. And we also do have a merch store if you want like a sweet shirt or get your grandma bumper sticker or whatever. I don't judge. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So I just also want to say, because I didn't say it, but yes, thank you, Mike, for being here. This was fantastic. I'm actually really glad I had an opportunity to jump in on this Gaiden because like I said, it's been a hot minute since I played this game. But man, once I got back in, I was just like, oh shit, I really want to talk about this. So I'm glad that we had this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
So I suppose with all of that being said, until next time.
Play with the joysticks that your copy is also playing with.